The Charlotte Podcast Festival is presented by Blumenthal Performing Arts, the Queen City Podcast Network, Eclex Creative Agency, and WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source, the home of acclaimed podcast Charlotte Talks, She Says, The List, Amplifier, Southbound, and FAQ City. Learn more about WFAE and our latest podcast, Work It, at WFAE.org.
Welcome to the Charlotte Podcast Festival. My name is Sarah Pollock, and I'm with Queen City Podcast Network. I'm the production manager at Queen City Podcast Network. I'll be your moderator for this hour of the Charlotte Podcast Festival, and the first podcast festival presented by WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source, Queen City Podcast Network, Blumenthal Performing Arts, and Eclex Creative Agency. This hour session is booking and being a great guest. This hour we're going to, well, first we're going to say hello to our panelists. Bear with me. It's been a long day. Okay, so first we have Jill Bjers, a self-described Jill of all trades. She's a global traveler, Code for America leader, and organizer for TEDx Charlotte. She loves storytelling and civic engagement, and she's bringing those passions to WFA's upcoming Work It podcast, where she's interviewed everyone from a cabaret dancer to a stock trader. We next have Ohavia Phillips, previously a television reporter. Is now a social media leader with an independent content creator who hosts the O Show, which is all about empowering others and creating a sense of community. I think it's safe to say she's building an empire. Next, we have Vinroot Poole. Laura is an internationally recognized fashion expert who's been called the fashion queen of the South. In addition to owning Capital Boutique, located in Los Angeles and Charlotte, Laura hosts the podcast What We Wore, where she interviews notable guests from around the fashion industry. She is nothing short of inspiring. And Ryan Pitkin is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Queen City Nerve. Charlotte's alternative newspaper covering politics, culture, and beyond. He's also the host of the Nooze Hounds podcast, which features local community leaders and cool cocktails. So welcome.
Thanks. Thank you.
We're going to have a conversation about sport. Nope, not sports. I'm sorry. Guests and podcasting. We look forward to answering audience questions. While we ask that your audio remains muted for the session, you can leave your questions in the Zoom chat box, and we'll try to answer them towards the end of the hour. A reminder to the audience, the session will be recorded and will be made available to you afterwards at a point. And you can share about your session on social media on hashtag CLT Podcast Fest. You can even support the festival by purchasing a brand new Charlotte Podcast Festival shirt, which I'm wearing, from our website, which is charlottepodcastfestival.com. With that said, let's get started. Got some questions for y'all. So to kick it off, let's maybe talk about the type of guest each of you choose and book for your podcasts. Who wants to start? Go right ahead.
Sarah, I had to pull the present. Well, greetings, y'all. I want to say thank y'all so much for allowing me to be a part. Literally, this is so beautiful, and I'm so proud of the city. But honestly, when we talk guests, who to book, how to book, I think the biggest thing is guests just have to be willing to have fun, and they have to be willing to be vulnerable, right? The best guests are the vulnerable guests. So those are the ones who are just with anything, right? And so they're open, they're free. Even though you want to send them their questions before they are on your live. At the end of the day, it really is about just guests who can bring the energy, the who they are, the authenticity. Those tend to be my favorites, especially the ones who can freestyle, Sarah. Like, you know, you just never know. Magic happens when it's not scripted, to me.
As far as our podcast goes, it's a little different in the sense that from average podcasts, in the sense that it's a news podcast, and we are interviewing folks who are in the news, whether it be reporters. We've done plenty of elected officials. We've done folks who are just community organizers, founders of nonprofits, things like that. Folks who are on the ground doing the work is most important to me, whether it be anyone from those three camps that I just said. The most important thing to me is that they're real and they're going to have a conversation with us without spin or without fluff or without PR stuff. I have absolutely no interest in booking someone who has spokesperson or press media relations in their name. I want to talk to the folks who are actually doing the work on the ground.
My guests are mostly in fashion and in creative fields, and most of them do have PR people and marketing people behind them. And so I think they really love being on our podcast because it's the first time they can really tell their story authentically and vulnerably, if that's a word. Is it, Sarah? But I think it's the opportunity, in fashion, everything is, you have these fake canned answers. And I think that that's, for me, what's been the most exciting thing about doing it, is that people can really share.
I think the piece that I'm different than most of you guys is that our main focus is talking to everyday people who don't have a platform. So if you have a platform to tell your story, you're not you're not in the realm of the guests we're looking for. I love vulnerable guests, and anybody who's ready to have a conversation and let me ask them awkward questions is pretty awesome.
Quite an answer. That's awesome. That definitely sets you apart. So yeah, to Jill and to Ryan, what is your standard procedure on booking guests, and how do you find them?
So I think for us, originally it was people we would interact with in random everyday life. You run into somebody and I'm like, I wonder what their story is. Let's interview them. But that doesn't happen anymore. So I've turned to internet stalking people. That works really well. Some friends of friends. I'm surprisingly really good at internet stalking people. Yeah, it was a talent that I didn't know I have, and now I'm fully developed at it. So beware.
I would say for us, it's a complete shit show. Excuse my language. It's why I got a good laugh at the fact that this was the podcast that I was going to be on, because as my co-host and business partner Justin will tell you, I am in charge of booking the guests, and it is an anxiety attack every other week when we do it, because I'm a procrastinator in general, but at the same time we are reporting news. We are doing episodes on hard news. Now, that being said, a lot of times, especially at the beginning, we would have guests based on the cover story that we wrote in our print issue of Queen City Nerve that week. And that would be a little bit easier, because we'd get them ahead of time and say, let's talk about the issues behind this, the things that didn't get touched on in the story, things like that. But a lot of times, especially lately, it doesn't always work out that way to where you can get someone to come in and talk about the details behind that. So you just sort of find who you find. Whether it be, for instance, there was I'm seeing now in the comments, there are so many folks from outside of Charlotte, so I won't try to just localize what I'm talking about so much, but there was a huge debate last year over a new arts tax that was going to be voted on in the city, and whether there were a lot of people for a lot of different reasons across aisles who were for it and against it. And we had a great episode by just bringing on two people on both sides of the issue to debate it. That was one of the better ones. But then at the same time, sometimes you just have two people who are sort of touching in the same topic of interest. Like we had Judge Kim Best, who sits over eviction hearings here in Charlotte, join social activists and Greg Jackson, who works in affordable housing on the ground and grassroots level. And they just sort of sat there and have completely two different perspectives to talk about the same issue. So I'm always looking for that sort of thing. And then when it comes down to within the last 24 hours before the podcast, I'm just calling people who I think have some perspective on what's happening in the news lately. And most of them are just sources from my journalism reporting and career.
Well, that's been working really well.
I appreciate it. You're, as my producer, a lot of those times, I enjoy it.
Well, yeah. So, Ohavia, the next question is for you. How do you reach out to guests you don't know? Like what works and what doesn't work in terms of language, email versus social media, messages, and so on?
Absolutely, Sarah. So this is my favorite question because, you know, the age of social media, digital media kind of watered down the respect aspect of reaching out to guests. At the end of the day, here's what never goes out of style, friends, is, hey, how are you? Amazing day. My name is Ohavia from where. The first thing is you never want to assume that anybody listens to your podcast or knows you, right? So you want to come in humble. But the second and most important thing is it's all about your approach, especially in knowing how to like talk to people and inspire them and honestly garner their interest to be on your podcast. So for me, how I do it is I do it both ways, Sarah. So I have DM'd and it has worked that way, but I also have found like their email and their bios, and I'll just reach out like, hey guys, you know, hey, how are you? Hey, so-and-so, how are you? I was wondering if you would be interested. My name is Ohavia Phillips of The O Show. Here is how it started. It is community ran, it's community inspired, and here is why I want you on the show. And I think that's the part really that can make or break, I guess, you know, taking your episode to the next level. You want to know, okay, yes, I'm bringing them on, but I love that Jill brought this up. It's being intentional about your guests. So it's not just bringing people on because they have large platforms on social media. We're beyond the clout, right? We want more conversation. It's not even about just like bringing people on because they're super popular and famous. We're beyond that. We're moving toward purpose. So it's about understanding where a guest should fit and where to put them in the theme for your show. Because at the end of the day, it's a dual effect. It's helping them, but it's also helping you. So you got to be intentional. But the reach out, critical, very critical.
Right. That makes sense. To anyone on the panel, what do you do if a guest says no or not at this time to being on a podcast? How and when do you follow up with them when you really want them on the podcast?
We haven't had a lot of no's because most of our people are within our network and they're designers that we carry within the store. But I have had a celebrity client who in person said, I really want to be on the podcast. And then when we reached out, said she wanted to be paid to be on the podcast. And it was such an interesting moment because, you know, we just thought, oh my God, you don't understand what this is about at all. You know, like This is, and I think if somebody wants something like that, then they're never going to be a good guest because they're not going to be able to share. They're doing it for the wrong reasons. And so, you know, it's not a great fit, but that was a great no that I was happy about.
I've had a couple of no's, but mostly one of them is he didn't think he had a story to tell, even though I thought he did. But if I have to force you to tell your story, it's going to be the most boring story that anybody's ever listened to because you don't want to tell it. So I just thank them for their time and move on to the next person. Like it's not a big deal if you don't want to be on it. There's plenty of other people who want to talk.
I agree with that. Go ahead, Ohavia.
Oh, no, go ahead, bro. I'll go after you.
I will say we deal with a lot of no's just because we work on a short notice, and a lot of times I'll reach out within 24 hours and we can't say, okay, we'll record in a couple of days. It's got to be recorded Thursday night and it's got to go up Friday morning because it's news and it will change. So like, but for example, it's never anything rude. And I also can say that, well, we do get a lot of no's for that reason. It's always pretty amicable. And it's not anybody trying to dodge a story as much as just a time constraint. U.S. Congresswoman Alma Adams was going to be on maybe today, but in the end, she works in Washington. She's a very busy woman, and she, when I say today, I mean I literally just came from a podcast, and she said I can only do 30 minutes instead of the full hour. And respectfully, I said I'm really looking forward to this episode with you. I want to do a full hour, so we're just going to pass, and we're going to, like Jill said, there are many people who have things to say about the news in Charlotte. So just keep going, really.
Yeah, no, retweet. Much like Ryan, I've never had a guest say no, but I've had to say no to guests. And Laura brought up a really good point. It's a lot of times people want to use a podcast platform to promote whatever it is. And so I get a lot of asks like, hey, Ohavia, I would love to be here and talk about this. And if it's not a good fit, I'm not going to force it, because here's the thing, I'll be doing the supporters and injustice and also myself, because we're talking creative integrity here, right? So I don't get a lot of no's, but I give a lot. And I'm trying to get used to it because, and I love the point that Ryan brings up is a lot of people want to join and it's just dry or, super PR. And it's just not, you want the raw emotions, that authenticity, that vulnerability. And so if guests don't present that, I'm not interested. So I'll say no.
Those are great answers. Thank you, guys. I've got a question for Laura. As someone who has been a guest on a number of podcasts, our audience might be interested in booking celebrities, government officials, notable figures on their podcast. What is the best way to book a celebrity or notable person?
I think just be yourself and be natural and be honest. I also think that one of the things that helped us was just to put our heads down and work, and to have 50 podcasts in our arsenal that we can say, please listen to one of them to see what we do and what it's about. And that has seemed to work better than anything. I think that we started to get so many more yeses and so much more interest from people without even reaching out to them reaching out to us when we had a body of work that we were proud of.
Nice. Okay, so everybody, let's say you've booked a guest. How do you prepare the guest prior to the podcast taping? Like, what do you send to them?
Nothing. No, because we've noticed that people really freeze up and have these really stupid answers when you do that.
In that same sense, I've heard other podcast hosts say this too, but it's big for us when we meet them down in the little deli and bar below or next to our podcast studio. We'll get to sitting and talking, especially if we're waiting on a second guest to join us, and we don't want to talk about anything that's going to be on the podcast. If that starts to go into that direction, we will say, we're not talking about this. Let's talk about that cat crossing the road over there. Anything that's not going to be on the podcast, because we don't want to waste. You'll always end up saying something great and then be like, damn it, that won't be recreated.
I would agree. Like, I say things all the time, and somebody's like, can you say that again? I'm like, no, because I have no idea what just came out of my mouth. I assume the rest of my guests are the same way, so we don't send them anything. We generally do about a 45-minute interview or so. So I ask for an hour and 15 of the minutes of the time. And that time that I'm like kind of prepping them is actually on tape at the beginning. In case they say something really amazing right there, I want it. So.
Another thing I'd say is that if there's something you want to talk about, that we had a guest recently who had posted publicly about depression, and we did reach out to her beforehand to see if she was open to discussing that in this podcast, and it ended up being one of the best we've ever done. But I think if there are topics that are sensitive, maybe to say, would you feel comfortable discussing?
That's good advice. Okay, so let's say the guest is a total stranger. How do you make them feel comfortable during the interview when it's likely the first time that they've talked to you? This might be good for Jill, actually.
Sure. I interview a lot of strangers. So a part of my internet stalking is finding some kind of common thread that we might have, or something that I find about them online that I want to ask them. Generally, if you ask somebody something, at least for me, when I have asked somebody something pretty innocuous about like their interest or something, or a meme that they posted online or something like that, it opens them up. They start smiling. Like it builds a rapport pretty quickly. So that generally works, especially when you're, stalking them.
I've had sort of a hard time with it just because my first 40 podcasts were in person, and then the last 10 have been via Zoom. And one thing that did help a little was they're now just audio and not video Zoom, because I found that really distracting. But it's hard. It's a totally different skill set, I think, to make your guests feel comfortable. And I also think it's a little bit of emotional intelligence and sort of common sense on how to make people around you feel comfortable and willing to share, I guess.
Yeah. Also, to chime in after Laura, I think that making guests feel comfortable has everything to do with, again, it falls on the host, right? So never diverting from the culture that you've created for your podcast. So for me, I love music and I love people. So I'm going to combine the two. So I'm going to play music when you come in. Well, of course, this was pre-La Rona. But now that we're virtual, what I do is I play music on the Zoom, and I always set up like a pre-conference call where we can get to know each other. And I do the same thing like I would do if we were live. And what I notice is that opens people up, but also just asking them, hey, how was your day? What are some things that you're seeing? So, let's not talk about the topic. Everything else your way going good. And that just gives them an opportunity to, just ease up a little bit, because people do get nervous when it's time to record.
You have booze, so I'm just completely cheating.
Cheating. Right.
The last 30 minutes are always better than the first half.
Yeah.
But it's true. I actually think that people, ours, we edit. And so when we start, we say, look, just so you know, don't be worried about fumbling over your words or saying something you don't feel comfortable with. We can always edit. And I think you always get the best stuff towards the end of the podcast, because people have warmed up and feel comfortable with you. And if you just hang on.
Right.
To anyone on the panel, what are the qualities of a good podcast guest? Like, what is good guest etiquette to you?
I think somebody who, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go first, Laura, because you know what?
Mine's pretty quick. I just think somebody who listens. I think if you're really listening.
Oh, yeah. For sure. In addition to listening, Sarah, I was looking forward to this question. The first thing is, you got to be on time. Yes. You want to be a guest on our show, you got to be on time. Two is you got to honor the commitment. If we say we're going to record on this day at this time, please show up and don't hit me with the email like, hey, Ohavia, loved your earrings. By the way, I'm not going to be, no, don't do that. Now I'm pulling up on you, So I think it's about listening. Also knowing what we're going to ask you before, because I know for me that journalistic, a lot like Jill, I am a stalker, but also I like to prep people so they know what they're getting. But read everything that we send. It's thorough. We took the time out to be our own administrators. Listen, read it through, show up on time, and if there's any changes, let us know so we can pivot, because in podcast world, the pivot, we keep it strong, but if we don't have to, that'll be amazing. So please, help us. Help, like Kevin Hart, please.
I would say in our sort of news topic is you just have to have someone who's super knowledgeable, but at the same time ready to talk about anything, because the second half of our podcast goes off topic. We have a topic for the first half. Second half is just whatever's happening locally, 3 news topics that don't have anything to do with that topic. So you want to find a good person who's going to be super knowledgeable about that expert topic, quote unquote, that they are brought in to talk about, but who's going to be open to just kicking it with you and talking informally for the second half, because that's an important part of why people tune in.
I would say ditto to everything that everybody said. I really like talkers. And I would say it's probably my co-host Stephanie Hill is a talker. And so her getting together with somebody she's interviewing who is also a talker ends up with a lot of tape and a lot of really interesting stuff. So I'd say we probably both really just like people who want to talk and share their stories and, and show up on time.
Yes.
Yes.
Please.
Right. Punctuality is key, everybody. Just know that. Well, to that note, what makes a bad podcast guest other than lateness? Have you had a bad guest experience? And is there a way to ensure a good interview still happens with a bad podcast guest?
Yes.
For me in fashion, it's usually somebody that's too well rehearsed and has told their fake story too many times.
Yes, seriously, Laura.
Yeah, that's true. And we have a good bit of politicians on, but I, just as a journalist in general, especially at an alt weekly, I'm very pessimistic and skeptical of all politicians. So I'm very careful of which ones I book. And I know the ones that are going to be sitting there trying to send a message. I'm not trying to get one on who is in the middle of a campaign, for one example, is one way to invite that sort of not spin, but just created message that they've been talking about on the campaign trail over and over. Another pet peeve of mine, if this isn't necessarily a bad guess because it's not maybe their fault, but I just really, if someone can't talk into the mic the right way and they're soft spoken or they're looking away from the mic over and over can be very frustrating, because they might be saying something awesome and you're stressed out because you're just watching them and hearing in your headphones that it just sounds horrible. And I have all sorts of different ways that I'm trying to show them, like without saying it out loud, speaking to your mic.
Yeah.
Stop playing with your shirt.
Oh, yes.
I'm not sure we've had really a bad guest. So far we've been really fortunate to, but then again, my podcast is coming soon. And so we've done one season. I don't have a 90 thing like Laura, where she's just got this huge, like beautiful content to share. But we haven't really had a bad one.
You will.
See, Joni, did you? Yeah, hopefully the WFAE gods heard that.
I've never had a bad guest, but in addition to like bad etiquette, I think the biggest thing is don't hog the ball. And what I mean by that is, we invited you to speak about a thing. Don't finesse and pretend all the way up, and then when it's time to go live, you're not giving that same energy. And I love that Ryan brought that up, because I have seen that a couple times where it was like, wait, what happened? I thought that you were an expert in this and you did this. Then like it's narrowing down to the time where we go live, and it's like, no, remember I sent you the questions, you knew what I was going to ask. So I think it's all about just being honest up front. Don't hog the ball. If you're not that guest for this episode, look, let us know. Again, podcasters keep their pivot game strong. I guarantee that we have about 2 more possibles. You just got to let us know, and definitely leave the space open for others to share.
Okay, those are great answers. Let's see, to the panel, who has been your favorite guest to book, interview, and what made it a memorable moment or interview?
I can answer that because I just literally walked upstairs from recording with him. He's a community organizer, Robert Dawkins, with the Safe Coalition, and he's been a friend of mine for a long time. One of these people that I've been reporting on since my last publication, and the work that he does is amazing. He's one of these folks who is just constantly working within the system, but on the grassroots level, but most importantly on a podcast level. He just wants to talk about it in a really level way, like in a down to earth, as if you're just kicking it at a bar or whatever. Like, I say bar because we're the Nooze Hounds and we have cocktails, but wherever. He'll talk about anything you want to talk about. Like I said earlier, when we get into the second half, when it's just 3 topics that we don't even tell the people what we're going to talk about because we just want it to be an informal chat. He just said just now, right before we got it, he was like, this is the fun part. This is the fun part. Let's see what we're going to talk about this time. And I just love someone with that energy. So he's been my favorite, and he's the only 3-time guest. He was our first ever guest. He's a guest in June, and he was a guest tonight.
Nice.
My favorite is a 2-time guest as well, and it's a person that I work with on a daily basis who works in my company but has been in fashion for 30 years. And just to be able to ask him questions and to understand his story, because I think you get so much deeper and you ask questions you would never ask in real life. And there were things that, I've known him for a long time, and there are things I never knew about his story and his history. And I think just discovering things that you would never, you never considered maybe.
That makes sense. Yeah.
My favorite guests are all of them, because all of them gave me the opportunity to do an Oprah. And when I say an Oprah, literally all of my guests did giveaways. I didn't ask them to, Sarah. That's the thing. Y'all, I didn't ask them. They were like, oh, hey, well, can we give your guest this? So when I launched my first ever live talk show / podcast, we had guests Thomas J. Bean and Raven Solomon, who gave away books, like whole chapters of books or whole books to help guests who want to tap into, being an entrepreneur. And so each guest offered a resource, and any opportunity I get to say, you'll get a book or you'll get a car. It can happen. I take that opportunity fully, but all of them have been amazing, because you never want guests to walk away with just an experience, but also resources. And all of them have definitely given that.
I think every time I interview somebody, I kind of fall in love with them. So this is a really hard question. Luckily, we're only on season 1 because it's going to get awkward on season 4 or 5. But if I had to pick one, I really enjoyed my interview with the burlesque dancer. She was great, and a ton of fun, and is still trying to convince me to become a burlesque dancer, and she does not even understand what a lost cause that is.
You can do it, Jill.
She does not
I
even
vote
get
yes.
how
No?
lost cause this is, but she's still trying. So I think that's really great. Like that shows like a, you know, really anybody who's like super passionate about what they're doing. I love talking to them about that. So
Yeah.
it's hard to narrow down. So I think I love them all.
Sorry. No, I'm sorry. I'm a mess right now. So this has been a lot of information. I love it. Has the pandemic made it easier or more difficult to book guests for you? And how are you at conducting interviews now with like the equipment that people are using for that?
Easier because nobody can say they're out of town.
Yes, I think it's easier too. A lot like Laura, I think it's easier. Honestly, it's easier for me to vet people. So now I could spend more time like stalking web pages and things you're doing in the community or things you said you were doing, and then just putting 2 and 2 together because you can't, you know, we could go outside, but it's, you know, limited, it's staggered. So I think it made it easier to really stalk people. That sounds bad. Y'all know what I mean. Research, vet, right, Jill? Help me, Jill. Help.
Yes.
R&D.
We're doing internet research.
Internet, that's what it's called.
Internet research.
Yes.
I would probably say both. Easier because less scheduling conflicts, and you know it's really hard to say you know you don't have time when you know everybody is home all the time. But harder because it's harder for the guests that we have that are less technically challenged. They're more technically challenged, I guess. The equipment sometimes is a little bit harder for them to you know manage. So
Yeah, I very much dislike it just because I don't like doing Zoom talks in general. Not to say I don't love this. This is such a blast. But as far as an interview goes, I mean, when I'm the interviewer, I really don't feel like I'm getting the same connection with the person, and I much rather have someone in the room with me. We were able to do a few Zoom ones that went really well. I'm not upset with any of ours, but it made it a lot harder with Queen City Podcast Network being shut down there for a few months, and I was sort of doing the production work as far as noise levels and stuff that I had experience doing in my old podcast. I did local music one called Local Vibes that I was the producer and everything on, and I'm familiar with the sound levels, but I just found that doing that while I'm trying to do an interview is so much different than just being able to focus on a conversation between 2 people. And it's better in person just in general for human connection. But we haven't slowed down. We've been able to keep putting them out, and some of our Zoom interviews are some of the best we've done, I think. So it's not a complete loss. But now Queen City Podcast Network, shout out to you guys over there because, and I'm talking to Sarah, because they've been able to create a space that is socially distanced and sanitized with mic covers and everything. We've been able to get back in person with a few people and not feel any risk about it. So that's been great.
Been trying to grow with the times. Okay. Well, yeah, that's you know, everybody's got their way of doing things. So I'm sorry, I'm just checking, like we're getting a lot of really good audience questions. I might shift to that soon, but I'm going to do maybe 1 or 2 more questions from the list. How do you keep track of guest invitations and bookings? Do you keep a schedule or spreadsheet?
Google Sheet.
yep, Google Worksheet.
Mm-hmm.
I am embarrassed to say Popcorn Ryan.
Flying by the seat of my pants, calling someone the day before.
Same. Yeah, same, Ryan. Same.
There's nothing to write down. They either said yes or I'm moving on to the next person.
Same, Ryan. I think we're cousins. We're cousins.
Yes.
That's exactly what it is.
That's what's up.
That's why we have a panel, because there's no one right way to do any of this, I don't think. Great. Well, how do you ensure diversity and intersectionality with guest bookings?
This is really important to us because just as an alt weekly and a journalist, there perhaps, I wouldn't put it over any other industry, but I'm just saying in our industry, especially, representation matters, and platforms and people speaking about specific news issues, you have to have representation. So I'm always paying attention to that, and just scrolling down my own, our own page, our News Hounds page, and making sure, am I messing this up? Are these pictures of these guests for the last 3 weeks? Is it missing something? I have a funny story that I'll keep short. For our end of year issue in December, we did a year in review for 2019, and we called 3 different journalists, and they kept popcorn somebody else, as Ohavia put it. I haven't heard that in forever, but they kept saying, no, but this person can come on, and that person said, no, but this person could come on, and it went from literally two activists, Alvin Jacobs and Dorothy Counts, who have been around in Charlotte forever doing the work. One of them younger, one of them older, black woman, black man, talking with me and Justin, who are white hosts, to somehow breaking down into being 2 white journalists joining us for Year in Review. And they were white males, and it was just, we got called out on it on Twitter and saying they called it snooze hounds instead of news hounds. That was Kathleen Purvis with the clever diss that we'll never forget, just because we're very aware of those optics. That time it just worked out that way because that's how it kept getting handed down. I can't do it right now. This is who can do it, and it ended up that way. But we're very well aware that people, especially our readership, are the type who will call us on it immediately when it starts to become a trend.
And we have a worksheet that does this. We do, so that way we make sure that, because we're like, I mean, not exactly like Ryan, but, we're interested in representation. So we want, we love demographics and all that kind of stuff, but also how they sound, because we want a difference in sound. Neither me or my co-host have a Southern accent. Every once in a while, it's fun to throw a Southern accent in there, or somebody who sounds different, or, that kind of thing. So making sure that people feel like they're, at least attempting to make sure that people feel like they're represented.
Yeah, I love that, Jill. I think the biggest thing when we talk diversity, equity, and inclusion on podcast platforms, it's so important for us to see beyond even like me being an Afro-Latin woman, right? It goes beyond that. And I love that Jill brought this up. It's like having somebody with a Northern accent, having somebody from the LGBTQ plus community, having family from there, having people, we're in Hispanic Heritage Month, wrapping up, being intentional about pulling people in from the culture, not to commodify it or make it a trend, but to pull them in to really talk about, okay, listen, give it to me from your point of view. Give it to me from your scope, because it goes beyond making great content. At the end of the day, as podcasters, we have a great mantle to manage. And it comes down to giving people platforms to let the world step into their world, but also to see and hear and feel all of these things that even as hosts, we can't sell, right? Only the guests can bring people into their world. So I think that when we talk DE&I, even in the creative sphere, it's so important for us to see it with including race, but also different experiences, so that we can really talk about these things that have been plaguing our nation for so long. So I love that Jill brought that up, even knowing different accents. Like, I'm a New Yorker, but I live in Charlotte. See, these are things. These are things, Ryan and Laura. These are the things.
I mean, I would say we're intentional about it, and we have an incredibly diverse internationally group of people, but in general, fashion is not very diverse, and so it's been challenging and disheartening.
Well, I've actually produced a couple of episodes for you where we did have somebody in a few different continents, a couple of different. Yeah. I feel like you're purposefully spotlighting them, which is really good. Okay, so guys, it's time for questions from the audience. Do you have a question for any of the panelists about today's topic? Feel free to put them in the Zoom chat box, and we'll try to get to them all. But I am going to go ahead and start with one that I saw a while ago. This is from Stephanie. How do you handle it when a guest doesn't open up to you when the microphone is on?
we just know that it's going to be a short podcast. I mean, you do your best and you're warm and and I think in all of our podcasts, I think I share personal things about my life and hard things and things that will, hopefully allow them to share in kind, but a lot of times they don't, and it's going to be a 25-minute podcast because people don't want to listen to that. I mean, I think editing is so important. It's not about putting out an hour-long podcast. It's about putting out a great podcast.
Right.
I think now I'm starting to see my safeguards here as we talk about it, because I never talk about my own podcast. But not only do we have the booze to cheat on that level, I also have a co-host, and neither of us have any filter. So if someone's not talking, we're just gonna talk back and forth about whatever the issue is, and maybe we'll say enough wrong things to the person has to jump in and say, hold on a second, this is why I was called here.
I love that, Ryan. In contrast, though, I don't have a co-host. I just bring on guests to be my co-host. And so, Laura's being nice. She said 25 minutes. I'm gonna give you 10. And I'll still give you a t-shirt and a thank you card, but it's gonna be 10. Strong.
Well, and also, Ohavia, we've also not aired podcasts that were not great.
Yeah, no, I'm with you too. I have a ton of those.
Yeah, we've not aired, we've not developed, we haven't aired anything. We have not produced interviews that didn't, that were bad, or the sound was bad, or you wouldn't stop touching your shirt or hitting the table when you talked, or, things I just couldn't get you to stop doing during the interview that made it not enjoyable for somebody to listen to. But I think that's the reason why I like talkers, is I don't really I'm a talker, in case you didn't notice. So it's pretty easy for me to get somebody to talk, I think.
I would say it's fair to assume that most podcasters are talkers, or the ones on this panel. I feel like so. I have a little follow-up question with that. Just how if you're not going to air the interview, how do you let that guest know, or do you let the guest know if you're not going to air that interview because it didn't meet your standards?
We rescheduled it
Mm-hmm.
and said, let's try it again. Actually, a couple of them we did that.
That's great.
Yeah. Retweet. I'm with Laura. I always reschedule. That way they don't feel bad. And I always put it on me like, come back next week. But yeah, you don't want to make them feel bad, because you never know. And again, in podcast world, it's so connected, and you'll see people again, especially here in the city of Charlotte. I see we have people from VA and New York, so it might be different, but you just never want to burn bridges, because you never know when you'll need that guest again.
Right.
Well, people are willing to share, and people are being vulnerable and sharing their story. I think that's also just kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think we've just have the couple that we have been able to use. They've just we've told them they're slotted for season 2.
Mm-hmm.
That we just didn't have the space in season 1 to do it, but that we still appreciate their time, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Those are great answers. I've got a question from Christina. For those people who don't normally have a platform, how do you make sure you do their story justice without coming off like you're exploiting their experience?
So I think this is where we have one of the great things that we have is multiple editors. We have at least 3 people who read the script in any one of our episodes before we record, so that way we get lots of different points of view of are we being true to this guest? We've had a couple that are challenging. We have one that was really challenging. My co-host interviewed her, which was probably a good thing, because she and I have a completely opposite view of the world. And so I struggled on authentically representing her without my personal judgment of the difference in the way we see the world. And so that one we had to run past a few people. We've run past a few friends. I cannot say enough, if you're going to script something, have other people read it.
Yeah.
You can't always tell how judgy your own words sound.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I think it's one of those inherent things where you just make the person comfortable, and if you believe in what you're doing, I think the best way to not exploit someone is to not exploit them. And I don't mean to sound crass or as if that's a stupid question. It's actually one of the best questions we've gotten tonight. But I think that is the best way, is to be true in your meaning, in your what you're trying to do, which is to give them a platform to share their experience. And if you're there for any other reason, which is for clicks or listens, and that's it, then you're in the wrong business anyway.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All right. Well, I do think that was a great question. So this one's from Melissa. She's going to be a guest on a game show podcast next Friday. So she's a bit nervous that she'll stumble. Any advice for, someone who's about to be a guest for the first time?
I think it's weird not to be nervous all the time when you do this. And I think once you say that first sentence, things get better.
Yeah.
And I also think sometimes when you think about speaking more loudly or being heard more, I think you automatically get more comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think to that point too is also don't think about it too much. Right? You've been invited for a reason. You have that thing that they like. You have the light already. So now as a guest, and it's a game show, I say, listen, go up there dancing, pull out the funky chicken, the sprinkler. I mean, if you're going to do it, because again, it gives you the opportunity to really live out something that a lot of people can't say that they've done. I mean, how dope is that to say like you're going to be on TV or on a podcast? Again, we work in one of the best creative spheres on the planet. So I think that if you're going to do it, do it.
I also think one of the tricks to public speaking is actually your audience really wants you to do well.
Yeah.
They don't want you to fail. And I think that in your head you tell yourself, oh my God, everybody's watching me, I'm going to be terrible. But your audience really wants you to be good. It's not that fun to watch people that suck,
No, 100%, Laura. Yes.
Yeah. They also don't know what you're going to say or what you're going to do. So anything that nobody's there fact checking you. I would have fun. Like, they invited you for a reason. They obviously think you're fun, or they wouldn't have invited you. Lean into it.
Yeah, and I think if they're good hosts and host a fun show, then you're gonna have a blast. Because I've done, between the two podcasts I've hosted, I've probably done 80 episodes, I'd say around 90, and I get sick, nervous before every one of them, and I don't even know why. Tonight's was between Robert Dawkins and a state rep, John Autry, who I've known for 12 years and reported on since he was city council member. I know him very well. Had no reason to believe it wasn't going to just be a nice, comfortable conversation. I still, 15 minutes before, it just got nervous as hell. And yet the thing that never fails in all 90 of those episodes is once you just start having a conversation with someone, it goes so quick and it's a blast. And you always are like, why did I care about what was coming? That was great.
So true.
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you're going to do great, Alyssa.
Oh, yeah.
So this one's from Amber. How can you tell when guests will be ready to bring that vulnerability? Like, that's in quotes.
When they start talking.
Yeah.
I just keep asking until it peels back those layers.
Yeah.
I'll ask them the same question in different words, 4 times, if they're just not giving me, if they just need to warm up to it.
And also, I think a prep before too, in addition to all those things, like, hey, did you want the questions? Because a lot of people actually not getting the questions and just flying off the handle. And some would like to know, what are the top 5? At least give me top 3. So I think that will really help. But vulnerability, I mean, that comes as soon as you sit in the seat. And I love that Jill said that, it's just constantly asking and reiterating, giving you the space, the grace and the space to say what you want and how you feel.
One of the things we ask in all of our podcasts, and I guess if you're on the podcast, you probably know it's coming, but we ask people what they wore to the prom. And people just get so excited to tell you about it, or embarrassed, but it really is such a vulnerable thing to share, about when you're 18 and a total dork.
I love that question.
All right. Sorry. That caught me off guard.
What did you wear to the prom, Sarah?
That's actually a good question, Laura. I'm thinking like,
It's a good question, and most people have a really fun answer for it, from what I've heard. So it's been really interesting.
I see you dodged that.
Laura.
I wore a dress. That's all. So this one's from Angelique. How do you find out a guest's information to contact them or learn more about them?
Yeah. The beautiful world of social media, for sure. I am a bio stalker. I am a Googler. The journalist roots didn't leave me. I will Google you in a heartbeat. My heart just beat. I Googled somebody. Jill, you got Googled. But literally, I think it goes to leaning really in on the easy grabs, which is social media, right? So check Facebooks, Twitters. And what I love about the power of social media is bios. So people are putting everything there, link trees, which is my favorite. You just click one-stop shop, look at their websites. And in those things, you'll really be able to tell what kind of guest this person will be, right? So it's small things. Did they update their website? How are their pictures? Do they even look the same from the picture they sent or they have versus, what they look like now? It's a good gauge. But listen, lean in on social media and don't feel bad for it. It's an easy grab.
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is great because you're going to give somebody a history, and then I just start Googling their name with that company's name, see what pops up. Because people share more on LinkedIn than they do. Like if you leave your LinkedIn private and I can't see anything, chances are you don't want to be interviewed because you're, or if you don't have a website, or if I don't have a website, so I guess that's probably not a good gauge, but because I'm lazy. But if that stuff is all private, if your social media is completely private, you're not interested.
Yeah.
So the people that you want to interview are actually pretty easy to stalk.
I love how everybody's been using the word stalk on this.
Jill started it, and I love Jill now. Now we're cousins, so I was like, yeah,
I'm just honest about it.
right.
It's the only answer to how do you find somebody.
It is. And then you call them because it's easy to ignore an email. It's easy to ignore a DM.
Yes.
Call them.
Call. Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, we've got another question from Alyssa. Alyssa, not Melissa. I often match up strangers for roundtable discussions. Do any of you mix and match guests, and what attributes do you consider whenever pairing people like that?
Ryan would disagree, but I have a really hard time having more than two people. I mean, having myself, me, and a guest and I. 3 people is too much. I've had 4, and it's really confusing.
Yeah, it depends on what for me, as far as what the dynamic is going to be. Like I said, when we had the 2 folks on to debate 2 sides of the arts tax issue, was very rewarding. And then tonight, the one we recorded tonight, John Autry has been working on some policing initiatives on a state level, while Robert Dawkins has been working on similar in partnership, well separate policing initiatives on a local level, and they've been together but apart while they do it. So it was really good to be able to have them both on. But for the most part, I prefer to have one person because it's only so much time.
Well, and also I think, it's like they have to be vulnerable around 3 people. It's one thing to ask to do that around one person, but 2 people you don't know, 3 people you don't know, it's a lot.
Yeah, I think for me to that question, Sarah, it's I think the easiest way to do that, and I love that question, is pulling guests in by themes. So like if we're going to do a roundtable of strangers, maybe, the theme is, podcast, right? And so you'll present guests from different industries, but the theme is what ties them all together. I've seen it work 1 of 2 ways. So when you have one person, that one person will open up and give you like the best content. When you start getting into 2 or more, it's getting risky. But like you could make it work, like having them, tag off each other and laugh. But I find that 1 is always good, but I love me a good 3-4 panel. I do.
Right. Well, yeah, sometimes outside of the comfort zone, everybody kind of gels,
Yeah.
So, okay. This one's from a very fun name, Thirst World Problems. How far in advance do you book guests? Well, we kind of covered this with some of you.
So we try to interview ours within the first 2 weeks of like talking. Anything further out than that, but we do a year production at a time. So all of our guests were interviewed. We completed interviewing for season 1 in June, and then so ours is kind of weird in that way.
Mm-hmm. And I know, Ryan, sometimes yours are day
Yeah,
up.
they're just right up to the deadline.
I'm Ryan.
It's a very hectic situation. Sometimes I get them as early as Monday from our Thursday recording, and that just makes me so happy. But a lot of times it's just running right up to the deadline and trying to figure out what's the news story that we want to really focus on. Sometimes that changes, and sometimes we do cancel on guests and say we're going to have you on in a couple of weeks because there's something more urgent to talk about right now in the news, and it's just one of those things. But it can be anywhere from 4 to 1 day.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of the nature of the beast for what you're doing. You're a news organization, so it should be very relevant to the time. So that makes sense. There's several ways to go about that too. We have a really, really great question from Mary. We talk a lot about looking for good talkers, but I've noticed that sometimes people's idea of what makes a good talker often excludes underrepresented folks. Example, non-native English speakers. How do you coach your guests to be good talkers? Any tips for helping people tell you a story and take you to a moment?
I think they have to trust you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah, they have to trust you. Also, in my opinion, a good talker is anybody who, when you give them the mic, let them speak. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like you don't want to coach too much because that's how you get that dry content. I think the thing is really building that rapport, that relationship, that trust. And the thing is, in what we do, we can't do it in depth as much as we want. So it could be like on a week basis or like if you plan out months worth in advance. But I think a good talker is anybody who is willing to tell their story with no coaching. So bring that accent, bring those experiences, bring all those things, because that's what the people want to hear.
Absolutely, I agree. I think the main thing about a good talker is not to say that you're well-spoken. That's got nothing to do with it. I think it's whether you're ready to express your truth.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, I think
I think they have to trust what you'll do with that podcast, what you'll do with all of that, and have to lean on your body of work to see that you haven't exposed people and made them see, made them not sound like themselves, I guess, or how they would like to be heard. Sorry, excuse me.
I would rely heavily on my work as a reporter in Charlotte for the last 10 years and have someone vouch for me in the community that I've worked with in the past to say that this is not someone who's going to use your message and twist it, but give you a platform instead.
Yeah, Ryan.
I rely heavily on the trust of a stranger, so that works. But I think that learning how to participate in the conversation in nonverbal cues, so that they know you're like listening and that you're interested and you're like, but you're not talking, so you're not talking over their audio, and giving them the space to like just talk. But if you show them that you're engaged, I think most people want to talk, and most people will fill up an awkward silence if you just let them have that silence.
That's a great point.
That's so good, Jill.
Thank you for recording this, because this wisdom is like not going to be here in an hour.
Those were really good answers. You guys were great. The questions, like the audience has been great also. That's all the time we have for the Q&A. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions. Let's give a big round of applause to our speakers. Got Jill Bjers, Ohavia Phillips, Ryan Pitkin, and Laura Vinroot Poole. Reminder to the audience, this session has been recorded and will be made available as an archive session. So keep an eye on your emails, including your spam, junk folder, for this recording as it comes available. We still We still have a month of free podcast sessions and panels taking place during the Charlotte Podcast Festival. Check out the list of sessions and speakers and register today on charlottepodcastfestival.com. You can share about your experience today by using the hashtag CLT Podcast Fest on social media. You can also support the festival by picking up a brand new, super soft, locally printed shirt. I'm plugging it and wearing it. charlottepodcastfestival.com. Make sure to join us for the virtual podcast happy hour tomorrow at 6 p.m. this Friday, where you can mix and mingle with other podcasters from around the world. Register for it on charlottepodcastfestival.com. Thank you again for attending today's session and for being part of it. I'm Sarah Pollock, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.